Welcome to the G5 Hive and our next installment of our Worker Bee series, where we deep dive into the G5 college football landscape with the folks that know the teams the best. If you're watching this on YouTube, please hit that like and subscribe button. And if you're listening to us in podcast form, please rate and review. Today, we'll be heading over to the Mountain West Conference and taking a look at the Fresno State Bulldogs, who finished 6-7 in 2024. They capped off their season with the appearance of the famous Idaho Potato Bowl, and they wrapped up their 2025 spring practice with their spring game on April 5th. We have a special guest joining us today. He is a 24/7 sports publisher. He covers college football and recruiting. He covers Central and Northern California. Plus, he covers Hawaii too. He is Jackson Moore. Jackson can be found at Barkboard on X. Welcome to the show, Jackson.
Thank you very much for having me. I really appreciate it.
Well, we appreciate you coming in and helping people get to know Fresno State a little bit more. But those tuning in to the G5 Hive for the first time, can you tell us a little bit about yourself and how long you've been covering Fresno State football?
Yeah, I think most people in these positions have some pretty deep roots with their programs they cover, or made a jump from another market or such. But I've got a neat story. I've made every Fresno State home football game since I was 1 year old. I've never missed one. My family started taking me to the games when I was in diapers. And right when I turned 18, I actually got an internship with scout.com. So I started covering the team. That would be about 16 years ago now. So I've almost got as many years as a credentialed media member as I did sitting in those seats at now Valley Children's Stadium. So seen a lot of Bulldog football, and I've been covering it now for a decade and a half. And it's just a joy to be able to do this for my job.
You're right. That is a unique story that I can't say most people would been there since day one, or at least pretty much your day one. Well, let's move over to some Fresno State football talk and start with the man in charge. The Bulldogs have hired Matt Entz as their new head coach. Entz comes via USC, where he was the assistant head coach and linebacker coach at USC. Prior to USC, he was the head coach at North Dakota State. What can you tell us about Coach Entz and what he brings to the table for the Bulldogs?
Yeah, he's a guy this area didn't know a whole lot about when he was named the coach, but as he's gotten to get familiar with the community, it kind of feels like a lot of the familiar coaches that Fresno State has had. And athletic director Garrett Classy said it from the opening press conference that, you talk to this guy and you hear a little bit of Pat Hill in him with the kind of physicality and smash mouth approach and a lot of the off the field stuff that he's important about. And even some Jim Sweeney in there and some recent Jeff Tedford with some of the schematics and both offensively and defensively. They don't just want to be punch you in the mouth like those Pat Hill teams were, but they also want to, after they've done punching you in the mouth, exploit you on the field and use the 11 to their advantage. So I think he's put together a pretty good staff too. He's got 2 young coordinators. He poached Northern Illinois' defensive staff, which had a really good year over there and even beat the Bulldogs in that famous Idaho Potato Bowl. So it was kind of wait and see, I think. And now a big recruiting run in June really has a lot of Bulldog fans sold. And Coach Entz obviously had a big run at North Dakota State, won some FCS national championships. And it's just kind of a matter of how much of it was a machine there and how much can he kind of get Fresno State restarted on his own, because, again, 6-7 last year, a little bit of work to do from what he's inheriting.
Now, you talked about those coaches they brought with them, and as it often happens when you get a new head coach, that means a new assistant. And Coach Entz brought over Josh Davis as his OC. Coach Davis joins the Bulldogs via South Dakota, where he served as the OC in 2023 and 2024. Can you describe the type of offense style that Coach Davis plans to run there at Fresno State?
Yeah, it's expected to be very much a smash mouth offense, one that they want to win in the trenches and at the line of scrimmage and run the ball a lot and very effectively. And, almost from what I gather, kind of like a San Diego State-esque running attack that the Aztecs had for basically all the 2010s. But then they don't want to be the inept passing team that a lot of those teams were and usually would cost those types of teams. So they're trying to find their edges in the passing game as well. They're not probably going to have as loaded of a roster as far as quarterbacks and receivers go as Fresno State's used to in recent years, but just enough to bail out yourself out of third downs and run play action and be a threat. So where if teams do stack the box, they can beat you over the top. And it's a challenge because Fresno State hasn't been this team the last several years. They were a spread and the running attack wasn't good at all. So this is definitely a change of pace, and they're definitely going to have to get a lot done in one offseason to make it work.
When you talked about that inept passing and try not to be like that, well, let's get to the position that it all starts, and that's a quarterback. Starting quarterback Mikey Keene, he's found a new home in 2025 at Michigan, while Joshua Wood is now over at Idaho. That leaves Jaden Mandel as the only quarterback on this roster who took a snap for the team in 2024. The new staff brought in E.J. Warner from Rice, and before that, he was at Temple. And then after the spring, they brought in Carson Conklin from Sacramento State. Jackson, how did this group look in the spring?
Yeah, it was, again, a big question mark, but also so much of the emphasis being on the running game and running backs as well. There might not be as much on the quarterback's shoulders, and we did see that in the spring preview that they held. A lot of game managing, a lot of, kind of being conservative a little bit and having to make some smart plays and not turn the ball over. And they were pretty effective at that when the spring wrapped up, at least. E.J. Warner and Joshua Wood were the two guys who left spring as the two competitors for the starting job. And Joshua Wood opted to transfer and go to Idaho. And so now the Bulldogs bring in Carson Conklin as well. It looks like it'll probably be Warner and Conklin competing for the job, and Jaden Mandel as well. I think he's got a shot as well. So 2 or 3 guys battling for the job. And I think you definitely have to give Conklin a shot here as well, because, I mean, his stats at Sac State, while not apples to apples, as a redshirt freshman, were quite a bit better than what Warner has done in any of his 3 years, albeit at some struggling group of 5 programs in the past. So I think it's still pretty open. I wouldn't be surprised to see them try to have Warner be the guy this year and Conklin be the guy the following year, but still a chance you could see either of those two this fall.
Well, those not familiar with Warner's game, how would you describe it?
Yeah, well, you look at what he's done in the past. He's been in some spread offenses. He's slung the ball around. The name's familiar. He's Kurt Warner's son, and you see a lot of that kind of style in his game. There's been slinging it around. He's had some big passing days here and there. They've also been playing from behind, where he's been at Rice and Temple, and he has thrown a lot of interceptions, and that's not what this offense is going to be at all. I mean, they're going to be under center. They're going to be running a lot. They're going to try to do everything they can to where they're not in obvious passing situations, whether it's 3rd and long or playing from behind. So he does have to change his game a little bit. I think it's going to suit him a little bit better based off of the interception numbers he had. And kind of same goes for Carson Conklin, as Sac State was running a spread offense. So they both have to kind of rein in their games a little bit.
And you talked about Mandel as being still an option. For those not familiar with his game or playing style, how would you describe it?
Yeah, so he did start the bowl game, and ultimately Joshua Wood got the most snaps. They kind of went with the hot hand a bit there, but I like Mandel. He's a local, which is always a big deal here around Fresno State, and he's very talented. He was a 2-sport high school star. He had a lot of options, both with baseball and football, and chose to stay home, and has shown some flashes in the bowl game as well. And it's an interesting one because for most of spring, they divvied up the reps between the 3 quarterbacks. And in the spring preview, he also saw about even reps. But just a lot of the comments from Coach Ince after spring were just about 2 guys. And I don't think he really ever outright said it was Warner and Wood, but that was the general assumption of the rhetoric that he was giving. So I expect Mandel to get reps in fall camp and kind of see where it goes from there. I know he's been training hard and working on some things, and got a good arm. He's mobile enough and kind of a do-it-all quarterback. So definitely I would consider an option, and a loyal guy that has stuck with Fresno State here through this process.
Well, Jackson, you made it apparent we want to run the ball. So let's get over to the running game. And Malik Sherrod nursed an injury much of 2024 season, but he's off to Boise State now. In Sherrod's absence, the Bulldogs leaned on Elijah Gilliam and had to count on true freshman Bryson Donaldson probably a little bit more than they thought that they would have to. but both are back for 2025, and the staff brought in Rayshawn Speedy Luke from Arizona. Jackson, how did this room look to you in the spring?
Yeah, Bryson Donaldson went from that true freshman who finally got unleashed the last couple of games and last fall to being kind of the leader of the team almost this spring, at least as far as the media is concerned. He's again another local, had huge numbers out of high school, stayed home, and really seems to be the focal point of what's going to be a run heavy offense. And he got his chance about the last 3 games of the season and really excelled, and only really came off the field when he was injured for a half against Colorado State. So I could see that being a similar case this year with the change of style. And I could also see this team running the ball 35, 40 times to where you're going to need 2 or 3 running backs. So it's not just going to be him, but I think he is going to lead the way. He's just very physical, got good speed for his size, added another 10 pounds this offseason, and he's expected to be the star. But you got Gilliam too. I think this offense probably suits him better too. He's not the fastest running back. He's pretty strong. So the smash mouth approach, I think, is going to fit him well. And then you throw in the lightning with Rayshawn Speedy Luke. We didn't get to see him in the spring, so it's still a little bit up in the air how they intend to use him. But anyone with that speed to complement 2 stronger backs feels like a good combination to me. So excited to see that. And you hear coaches say things in the offseason that you don't know how realistic it is, but they talked about playing 5 or 6 running backs potentially, or at least having them in the arsenal for the course of 13 games or so. And they've got a few more. Brandon Ramirez is the guy that's been waiting his turn, who fits this offense well. Jonathan Arsenault saw some time last year, and Devin Rivers is the younger brother of Ronnie Rivers, who had a great career at Fresno State and is in the NFL. And they're bringing in a 6'1", 225-pound freshman, Julius Gillick, who could be a short yardage guy. So it may not take injury for them to bust out running backs 4, 5, or 6 over the course of this year.
Well, you talked about Gilliam, Donaldson, and Luke, and in a small sample size, Coach Davis kind of used 3 running backs, using them like 41%, 27%, 11%, and kind of that rush share. His RB1s also get used in the pass game a little bit. I don't really know if we really saw a whole bunch of passing utilization from Donaldson last year. Is that something that he has in that arsenal, and he just wasn't asked to show it last year? And how do you see Coach Davis utilizing these running backs?
Yeah, I think he does. There just wasn't a lot of volume, and as mentioned, didn't really see a lot of him till the end of the year, and I think a lot of followers of the program were wondering, why they weren't letting him loose and seeing more of him, and then when they did, it was so effective. It was even drew more questions almost at that point. So he did show off a little bit of receiving ability in those last couple of games. I believe he scored a receiving touchdown in the bowl game. So there's a little bit there. Not sure exactly how much we'll see it. It's going to be in this new offense, probably more of a play action and leak type of a situation where maybe a check down to a running back is there. I think outside of Luke, probably not a ton of first reads going to running backs in this offense, but they're going to have 1 or 2 backs in the backfield a lot of times, and 1, 2, 3 tight ends a lot. So they're definitely going to get the ball to some guys that aren't regular receivers. And you brought up a good point, the running back usage. He did have 2,000-yard rushers last year at South Dakota. So these running backs, they're not worried about one guy hogging the ball. They know they're going to distribute it around, and that's what I expect to see this year too.
Do you see Luke being more utilized on 3rd down, or will you talked about using 2 backs at once? Will he be out there with, a Donaldson or a Gilliam?
Yeah, I think he's a guy you'd like to have in a 2-back formation, or a guy that can flex out into the slot at times. I know a lot of players get described that way, and you just oftentimes don't see it implemented a whole lot. But I think he is a guy that they could do that, especially because this receivers unit is not very deep or experienced, and it might just be easiest to implement a receiver / slot guy to kind of catch defenses off guard if you don't have a real go-to guy there.
Well, let's talk about those receivers. Via the graduation of the portal, the wide receiving room loses their top 3 wideouts from a season ago. That means there's a lot of opportunities for someone to step up big in 2025. Did anyone stand out to you in the spring?
Yeah, if you go down the whole roster too, it's like the top 8 of the 9 are gone from last year's roster. So it is a whole new receivers unit, except for one guy, Josiah Freeman, who was briefly in the portal and probably would have been just as targeted as some of those other guys if he hadn't have been injured. So a little bit of good fortune for Fresno State on that front. Not so much for him personally, but he is a just tall, rangy 6'3" receiver who is a playmaker, and you could just see it when they recruited him out of junior college that he was a guy that could at least make some big plays in one-on-one situations and red zones and things. And he redshirted behind a talented group in 22, and he just kind of battled injuries the last 2 seasons. So if he can stay healthy, it could be a real breakout year for him. And again, looking at South Dakota's tendencies last year, they did really have kind of one go-to guy that put up all the numbers and like 4 or 5 receivers behind him that saw some numbers, not a lot. So I could certainly see this offense playing out to where Freeman is very much the guy at receiver. And then it's going to be a whole cast of newcomers, and I really wouldn't pencil anyone in next. I think what happened in the spring was that it seemed like every practice one guy had a good day or flashed, and then the next practice it was a different guy. And so you just end up with a bunch of players that have shown some flashes but haven't really cemented themselves in any spots. But Josiah Aon, it could be 2 Josiahs out there. He's another tall 6'3" type of receiver who comes from Western Colorado. Had some big numbers at the D2 level last year. He's a local for Fresno State coming home, and really the only other guy on the roster that has college numbers. A couple of others. Jordan Brown is one of the rare guys that's back from last year. Jayon Farrar is a junior college addition who had some moments. They're bringing in Harold Duvall, 4-star recruit locally, which is a rare thing for the Bulldogs, and wouldn't be surprised to see him play early. So it's Freeman, and there's about 6 or 7 other guys battling for maybe 3 or 4 spots, and it's going to be competitive.
You talked about Josiah Freeman missing with some injuries, and he missed 2024 with an injury. I'm not sure if they talked about what that was, but if you know what ailed him last year and how's his recovery process going?
Yeah, my understanding is it's been lower leg issues, multiple of them. He was in and out a little bit in 23 and then came into 24 injured, got healthy, scored a touchdown, got hurt basically right after that. So, you got to see the talent and then see it sidelined again right there. But he was a full go in the spring. He had healed and looked like himself. So at this point, it's less about worrying about him being full speed and just more about durability for 3 or 4 months here.
And you talked about Coach Davis kind of having that one guy that they really like in the offense, and based on that small sample size from South Dakota, he tends to like the outside guy, gets them involved. As Carter Bell averaged 75 targets, 52 receptions, and 840 yards. He commanded a 26% target share. Jackson, who do you believe will lead this room in targets and yards in 2025?
Yeah, I certainly think it's going to be Freeman. I think it's anyone's guess who might be next or even compete with him. So, again, as long as he's healthy, if he's not healthy or if he goes down during the year, it could go a lot of different ways. So I'm curious to see who really emerges as number 2 or 3. I do think Josiah Aon probably has the best shot on paper at least, but again, just a big shuffling during the spring, so not 100% sure there. And I think another thing in this offense is that because they're going to be using so much heavy personnel, that unless you're 6'5" and all you can do is be on the outside, or you're 5'8" and you're basically just a slot guy, you got to know all 3 spots and rotate and be flexible. And so the players that can both physically and mentally grasp that, I think probably emerge more so than the talent for this year.
And with running the ball, they'll probably lean on the tight ends a little bit too.
Mm-hmm.
With the coaching change, what have you been able to learn in terms of how the tight ends will be utilized in this offense?
Yeah, they're going to be used a lot. In that spring preview they gave us at Fresno State, they almost had 2 tight ends just about every play, and they would go about 3 or 4 snaps, and then those 2 tight ends would come out and 2 more would come in. So they really are about 4 or 5 deep at the position. It's the one spot perhaps on the whole team where almost the whole group's back from last year. So there's some continuity. There really wasn't a star last year, but there's been kind of a bubbling depth of talent, I'd say, and they're all kind of maturing, it seems, at the same time. And I really think, aside from running backs, this is one of the strengths of the team, and that they're really going to build the offense around. So Richie Anderson really showed some flashes last year, ended up kind of being the guy for a while due to some injuries elsewhere. Cameron Beecham was supposed to be the guy last year. He's out of the portal and back on the team, so very much in that mix. Brock Liam is a wild athlete if you can put it together. Jake Tarwater is kind of your do-it-all senior in the group, and so and they got a few more options too. So I expect them to play 4 tight ends, and I don't know if one guy's going to have huge stats, but I don't know how many other schools are going to have more snaps at the position than the Bulldogs this year.
Now, Coach Davis has had their tight ends average. I mean, I'm sure there's one guy who blocks more and one guy who catches the ball more, but they've had their tight end average almost a 19% target share. Is there a guy that you kind of think that this team will lean on to be more of that receiving threat for the Bulldogs in 2025?
Yeah, I'd say at least physically, Liam and Beecham are 2 guys that are more receiving-esque, but the other 2, Anderson and Tarwater, Tarwater was supposed to be a receiving guy. He's kind of bulked up, and Anderson I thought was going to be really a pure blocker as a former linebacker and just a big physical guy. And I mean, there's been times he gets the ball in his hand and he just really gets some acceleration going and runs over defenders. So again, I think all 4 of them are going to be thrown to. I don't necessarily think one guy's going to emerge. I think Brock Liam might have the highest ceiling as a receiving target, but Beecham's probably more there now, and I think Anderson's probably the biggest full package.
Well, it talked about kids staying around, and we've got Rivers in the running back room. Tight end, it's a different room, but there's a familiar last name. Tyler Carr, son of David Carr's son, is on the team here, and then you've got Caden Rogers, who's moved from running back to safety to tight end. Can you talk about Tyler or Caden a little bit?
Yeah, Tyler's a neat story. He was at Bakersfield College briefly, and then came to Fresno State, and kind of been on and off the roster just due to some injuries. Disappeared a little bit last year, but always around the team if he hasn't been active. And a lot of times you see on the sidelines, it's Tyler and David, whether Tyler's in uniform or street clothes. The 2 of them are just hanging out there on the sidelines during the games and chatting, and that's basically become the norm at Fresno State recently. And now with Derek Carr retiring, you could see all 3 of them there at a lot of these games. So that should be fun. And curious to see if Tyler gets a shot. I think there's a role for a 5th tight end in this offense, whether it's injuries or not, and it's kind of open right now, and he could potentially be that guy. And he looks like a tight end. He's not just David's son. He's got the physicality to do it. Caden Rogers is interesting because he is a former running back. He's only about 6 feet, and I really thought he was going to be a tight end by name and be more of a fullback, because Bulldogs don't really have a guy that's listed at fullback, and they're going to have that position. But I mean, he was a 6-foot guy doing all the tight end stuff in the spring. So I don't know how that's going to end up, but we'll see. Maybe they have some gadget plays for him. That one wouldn't surprise me at all.
Well, the offensive line has some holes to fill in 2025. Injuries plagued the Bulldogs in 2024, as they had 9 different starting lineups on the offensive line. Kind of hard to get continuity when you have that. They will be looking to replace right tackle, left guard, and center heading into the season. Jackson, the staff also brought in 3 tackles and 1 guard from the portal. These transfers all come from the Big Ten. You've got UCLA, Iowa, USC, Illinois. Personally, I'm kind of curious who wins the center and right tackle positions, but I'm also curious to hear your expectations for this room heading into the 2025 season.
Yeah, it's a strange dynamic because you talk to any Bulldog fans, their biggest frustration with this program has been the O-line for about 3 or 4 years. And like in 2022, when they won the Mountain West Championship, they were so talented at quarterback, running back, and receiver. It really didn't matter. And then as they got a little less talented at those positions, and Mikey Keene got more and more hit and under pressure, it became very much a very irritating thing to watch on Saturdays. And at the same time, there was often 4 seniors in that O-line last year, guys that have played a whole lot and have been in there for the last 2 or 3 years. And so it was an O-line that was not up to par by fan standards, and also was its best version, and has graduated almost all of the line and have to replace them all with players that have probably a lot less experience. So it could be a breath of fresh air. I think ultimately the change of scheme is going to benefit these guys. They're not going to be in shotgun spread on islands, pass blocking nearly as much. It is going to be much more downhill, forward run blocking. And we're seeing a few guys that have been 3 or 4 or 5 year career reserves at Fresno State really excelling in this scheme. So on paper, it shouldn't work, but I think in execution, it should make a difference. Personnel wise, the big one right now is that Jacob Spomer is moving to center. He was a career left tackle, but doesn't really have the size for it next level. And they want to try and get him a shot in the NFL. So center is probably his best bet to do that. Really, everywhere else is up for grabs. Unfortunately, during the spring, a lot of guys were injured. Some of the names that do come back, Campbell McHarg and Torian Penwright, didn't practice at all in the spring. So still haven't seen how they mesh in. Gino Quinones, I think, is the most reliable transfer they brought in from USC as an interior lineman. McHarg's an interior lineman. Penwright can play either inside or outside. So with Spomer at center, I do think the interior line is in really good shape. Just between the tackles, it looks to me like a pretty big gamble. Most of the transfers that came in haven't played much, and some of the guys that saw a lot of the reps in spring were guys like Roland Fullwood and Julian Polindo, who were big recruits 4 or 5 years ago and really haven't played at all. And again, those are guys that are kind of big linemen that are more run graders than they are pass blockers on the edge. So again, it could work out, but the big question I think on this offense is going to be how good are those tackles, and can they survive on 3rd and long? That's really the one spot I've got a concern about with this team.
Well, Jackson, let's say the line just dominates in 2025. You said the staff has had a couple 1,000 yards rusher under their belt. Their success is due in large part to whom stepping up big in this room?
On the O-line?
Yeah.
Or in general?
Just
I think
the
Roland Fullwood would be a big one. He had a really good spring, and sometimes you're just not sure where the hype meter is in the spring. If it's is it because some guys were hurt and he was in there, or is he legitimately like a key player on this team that's going to start and be a big factor for the Dogs at tackle? So I think he's one I look for. Part of it is just having Jacob Spomer healthy. If you look at where the Bulldogs were in 2023 before he got hurt at 7-1, and then him missing the next 12 months of football, which was a rough spot for Fresno State. I think Spomer being absent was a big part of that. So just having him healthy is huge, but they need at least one sure tackle, and I think Fullwood is their best bet there right now.
We talked about how much Spomer means to this line. Who does this room look to as their leader?
It's definitely Spomer now, because there was like 6 seniors that graduated last year, and he was supposed to be one of them, but because of the injury, he got that extra redshirt year in. So it's one of the only guys that's back who's been a part of a lot of Bulldog football. A couple guys, as mentioned, started some games last year, and then you've got a bunch of new faces and some young players that haven't played much. So there's probably about 9 guys competing for starting jobs, even though I feel like a few are pretty well penciled in. But they're going to be able to shuffle things around, and maybe some surprises happen. But they're all looking to Spomer first.
All right. Well, if you had to pick an offensive player to have a breakout type season in 2025, who you got?
Yeah, it's got to be Bryson Donaldson. As long as he's healthy, he's going to put up some crazy stats, I think. They're going to give him a ton of carries, and it doesn't necessarily mean that he is going to have a huge year per se, or that the team's going to win a lot just because of that. But obviously, if they run the ball well, if they execute at the line of scrimmage, he's definitely going to benefit from it. And that is the plan right now. And I think he's got all the talent to do it. Obviously, no one's going to be Ashton Genty, but I think it's the best answer Fresno State can come up with at this stage.
I mean, even if you're like 50% of Ashton Genty was last
Yeah,
year,
exactly.
would be pretty good. Well, let's move over to the defensive side of the ball. We talked about the coaching changes earlier, and you brought up, the coaching staff coming over from Northern Illinois, and that is Nick Benedito. He joins the staff, and he served as a DC and safeties coach for the past 3 seasons there at Northern Illinois. Can you describe the type of defensive scheme that Coach Benedito plans to run there at Fresno State?
Yeah, he does run a 4-2-5, which is what Fresno State was running before. So you look at the offense and how drastic things are changing. It hasn't been nearly the same on defense. Now they do have to replace a lot of players, so there's not necessarily a lot of guys back that were playing that 4-2-5 defense each Saturday last weekend. But it should be schematically not a huge difference. They're going to keep that nickelback position as a specialized spot in the starting lineup. They're going to have their 2 linebackers. The D-line is probably going to be a little more exotic in this defense. I think that's the way I've described it mostly, is that last year's defense was a little more exotic in the back end, and this year's defense is going to be more exotic with the front. They're going to have a lot of different defensive line bodies and different ways that they're going to attack there, and then try to make things easy on the secondary, try to force 3rd and longs, and then make the big plays that way. So that's the idea. And again, I think it's not too big of a transition, and what they did at NIU, it's hard to deny how successful they were last year.
Well, let's talk about the position groups, and let's start up with those guys on the defensive line. The Bulldogs will look to fill the losses of Devo Bridges off the edge and Jacob Holmes in the interior. You talked about this team needing to be exotic there at the front. That duo created 62 pressure and combined for 6 sacks in 2024. To give you an idea, that accounted for 31% of the team's total pressures and 24% of the team's total sacks. But despite the losses, this room isn't in terrible shape. I guess I'm more concerned about the interior of the line than I am the edge. But what are your thoughts of this room heading into the summer?
Yeah, that's exactly it, because they had a lot of edges last year, and losing Bridges is obviously a big one for this team. But there was 5 or 6 guys that were playing, and most of those guys outside of Bridges are back, and then they brought in a few more. So I think the edge room has a very good chance to be successful this year. They've got their own personalized edge coach with the D-line coach, so they're really investing in that position. And as mentioned, the interior is where there is definitely a drop-off from last year. You lose Gabriel Lightfoot to Colorado, Jacob Holmes to Virginia, Kavika Baumgartner graduates. Nico is a freshman on the team this year. So they lose their top 3 tackles, and they brought in some transfers. Martin Owusu from Minnesota had a good spring. Dejan Lafitte was a bit of a surprise. He's a USC transfer, so not a huge surprise, but he just didn't play a lot last year in his first year with the team. So to see him go from maybe D tackle 5 or 6 to maybe 2 was a big jump. But I think in general on the D line, even the tackle positions, I feel like they're very deep. I think if everything's healthy, if everyone's healthy, you put 12 to 16 guys out there. I think the back end of that roster is not deficient to a significant degree. I just don't know how much star power there is and how high performing the first line, the first D tackles are going to be. So that's going to be the challenge, I think, for this defense, is to really just have a breakout star player. This defensive scheme is supposed to kind of create that a little bit. So hopefully a Martin Owusu takes advantage, but on paper, a sturdy interior D-line, but not a star-driven group by any means.
Well, who do you think makes the biggest impact on this defensive line in 2025?
I'm looking. Well, the staff claimed Jason Jacks was a Mountain West all-conference type of performer in the spring, and he should be looking like that as the one returning starter on the D-line. It's just, as you mentioned, those other guys were so much more featured that Jax hasn't gotten a lot of love yet quite for he might be the 10th or 11th most important starter last year, and now he might be 2 or 3 on this year's defense after everything that's happened. So this is a chance for him to have a breakout year. And then I really like the addition of Finn Claypool from Drake. Obviously, a big change of talent level coming to Fresno State in the Mountain West, but he has like 30 career sacks, was one of the best in the FCS, and he doesn't look like former 5-star Corey Foreman that's on this roster by any means. He's quite a little bit undersized, but he's fast and he's good off the edge. So maybe Foreman and Claypool combined to give this team those pressures that they're going to have to replace from last year.
We talk about Claypool coming in over from Drake and how fast it is. Probably that Drake relays that Iowa puts on that he gets it from. I'm originally from Ankeny, Iowa, so over there by Des Moines. So shout out to Finn. Welcome aboard. All right, Jackson, I'm a little bit nervous about the linebacker room. The Bulldogs have lost their top 3 linebackers in terms of snaps played from 2024. Nomura and Langley have graduated while Phoenix Jackson's transferred to Baylor. The room is green, and the staff brought in Kavion Thunderbird from Arizona State. Awesome name, by the way. And Pandon Pearson from Utah State to help in that department. Given the losses in this room, what are your expectations for this group?
Yeah, it's they do lose a lot. The 2 starters, the next Phoenix Jackson was supposed to be the star to come in this year after being like 3rd in that 2-man linebacker unit last year. Now he's off to Baylor. They had another 2 linebackers who contributed that graduated. So like 5 of the top 6 guys here are out. Fortunately, it is a 4-2-5, so you just need 2 ideally. And Jaden Pearson looks like he's locked in as one of those guys. Played a lot at Utah State last year, transitioned from safety, so he covers a lot of ground. And then Kavion Thunderbird and the 1 returner, Tim Thomas, are really the next 2 guys. I think between the 2 of them, you could see maybe a rotation to where they've got 3 decent linebackers on this roster, and there's a pretty good drop-off, at least on paper, from there. They talked about Logan Stute, a redshirt freshman, who was one of the staff's biggest gets, the previous staff the year before, who redshirted last year, potentially being that 4th guy. So there's a couple of players that have played at other positions. Zane Ricks was a DN last year. He's at linebacker. Justin Johnson from safety to linebacker. So they got some options to come up with linebacker number 4. But whoever is on that 2 deep is going to have probably some growing pains this year. But if they can get Pearson and another linebacker at least to lead the starting unit and stay healthy, I think they get by. If they lose a guy to injury or something doesn't pan out, that could definitely be a hole in the defense.
Well, let's take a look at the secondary. What stuck out to me the most was that cornerback Alzion Hampton played pretty much like every snap last season. He entered the portal twice, but then came back each time. So I believe that was a big win for the staff. This room also returns the like of nickelback Jakari Embry and safety Jaden Davis. Jackson Embry played nickelback much of 2024 season, but played cornerback in the bowl game. Where do you think he ends up lining up here for 2025?
Yeah, he should be at cornerback, and that's probably the biggest challenge for the Bulldogs in the secondary is just having someone to line up opposite of Alzillian Hamilton. He was one of 3 cornerbacks last year, and now Cam Lockridge is off to the pros attempting to, and Julian Neal went to Arkansas. So they do need a second cornerback, and just to have one of those 3 back is huge. Jakari Embry, who might be the leader there. He began last year as a cornerback and then moved to nickel. Jamarion Briggs is one of the most highest rated talents on this roster who's been dealing with injuries, so he's been in that competition. Sammy Hunter from Utah is a transfer who is a post-spring addition. So, there's a couple others. There's going to be a big battle to find that second cornerback, and that's going to be a big one for this defense.
Did anyone stand out to you in the spring from this room?
Briggs had a good spring, and that was exciting to see just because he's been so injured throughout his Bulldog career. He had a lot of expectations coming in and has kind of disappeared off of the radar a little bit. And so for him to just be healthy and then to capitalize was nice to see. Embry also had a solid spring as well, and he had a decent performance in the bowl game too, a lot better than we had seen earlier in the year when he started at corner, or began the year at corner. So those two are probably the names I would watch most, but not necessarily so separated from some other guys that they have guaranteed a spot or anything.
Who do you feel is ready to make a jump here in 2025?
At cornerback or in the secondary total?
In the secondary total.
Yeah, I really like the safety room. So they end up getting Cameron Braca back after an injury in Game 4 last year, and he had some big moments in 2023 and was supposed to be the leader in 24, and then disappeared with the injury. So, and he is like kind of the Jacobs Bomer of the defense, as we talked about. He's the guy everyone's going to be looking to, and they've got a nice two deep there. They've got R.L. Miller, who, like Embry, had some big moments at nickelback. He's going to be playing safety this year. Jaden Davis is also back at safety. He started in that game at Michigan last year and ended up having to play a lot more than they expected with some injuries. And then Ethan Tierney is kind of an underrated name from NIU that the staff brought in. He's right there with those guys. So I think that safety unit is going to be strong. I think at nickelback, Simeon Harris, who committed to Fresno State out of high school and now is here via the portal since he went to Colorado and Utah State. They need him to be big at that position. And then again, fingers crossed that whoever the second cornerback is can handle business.
All right. I asked you on the offensive side, so I got to ask you on the defensive side. If you had to pick a defensive player to have a breakout type season in 2025, who you got?
Yeah, it could be Jaden Pearson just because how important he's going to be. He's really the one linebacker they got to lean on, and I don't think they can afford to take him off the field much. Did have a decent year at Utah State last season, but he's going to be so critical to this team. I just think they're going to use so many D linemen. I'm not sure one guy has a huge year. They might use all four of those safeties, so I think those numbers are going to be spread out. But Braca, if he stays healthy, he could put up a year that statistically he hasn't had yet either.
All right. We've talked about offense. We've talked about defense. Let's talk about some special teams and how are those units looking? And do you have any concerns?
Well, the one concern is that their kicker, Dylan Lynch, he's statistically one of the most efficient kickers that Fresno State's ever had, and then he misses 3 field goals in the bowl game, which the Bulldogs have to go into overtime because of and lose. So he's gotten he's not in the best of graces with the Red Wave right now. But if you pull up those stats, if it wasn't for that one game, he's been very solid for the last 3 years. And then he missed one in the spring preview, so that didn't help put any water on those flames either. So you just hope that he shakes that off and that he has a good year, especially in an offense like this where you're probably not producing explosive passing plays left or right. You're going to probably get bogged down in field goal range a decent amount of times where you need to get those points. As they're going to try and have less possessions, so those field goals are going to be more important than ever. At punter, Claypool is not Claypool. Their punter from Australia is back. He's there, and so they don't have much concern at punter. And it's his second year at in American football, so should be better than the first. The return game's a question mark. We'll see who steps up there. All the athletes from last year have moved on, and the fun part for Fresno State is that John Baxter's back, who is just a known special team specialist and was here for the Pat Hill era and the Jeff Tedford era, and usually cooks up some fun things on special teams. So excited to have him around and keep cooking up some things for the special teams.
All right. Well, now that spring practice is over, which position group or groups do you think is the most concerning heading into 2025?
So the O-line is going to be critical for this program, obviously. And we just don't know until they get on the field if they're going to be able to win in the trenches or not. And then it's a little bit spread out on defense. Is there a top guy at tackle? Is there a number 2 linebacker? Is there a number 2 cornerback? And I think if you've got 8 solid guys at the other spots, maybe or 7 or 8, maybe those don't become too big of an issue, and the depth is there. But I think ultimately this season probably goes as far as the O-line takes them, and uh, we'll see how that works out.
Well, in today's age of NIL revenue sharing and the transfer portal, I know the staff hasn't been here too long, but how has that changed Bulldogs recruiting philosophy?
I'd say the biggest thing is, when the portal first became kind of mainstreamed and NIL wasn't there yet, it just felt like the Bulldogs were getting about 10 guys, and 5 were going to be just guaranteed plug and play star type players, guys that were either at the Power 4 level that wanted a bigger role, or players from the FCS level that were moving up. And now with NIL, it just seems like that tier of guys that were coming in are just going straight to the big money in the Power 4. And so very much as I hit on with some of the position units, you just look at this class that's coming in via the portal, and just a lot of solid guys, a lot of guys with potential, just not a lot of guys that are like day one stars on this team, like some players that came in here the last couple of years that Fresno State got used to. So very much across the board, good depth, decent talent. Will the star power be there? And the idea for Coach Ince and his staff right now is to create their own star power through development, and fingers crossed that they keep them around once they get to that level. The biggest change I would say with this staff, landscape wise, is that they are going to the Midwest a lot. They're recruiting Nebraska, Iowa, Michigan, Illinois, Missouri. These are territories that have not been Fresno State recruiting hotbeds. Jeff Tedford almost recruited exclusively California. So there's going to be a different flavor on this team, but Fresno State's in California, but it feels a lot more like Omaha and Des Moines probably than San Francisco or Los Angeles. So a lot of these guys get here and they feel like they're at home. I think it's going to work out well for the program. And as long as they don't neglect the hometown kids, it should be a good mesh here.
And I'm kind of curious your thoughts in covering this team and in the age of NIL, and we're still new in this and people getting paid. But are you seeing that Fresno State has the access to higher rated recruits, since it seems like the P4 is just kind of plucking like whoever made it all conference team, you're now gone, and instead of going to there, that hey, there's this like high 4-star or even this lower 4-star that's more available to us because they don't have, and we got the revenue sharing that just happened with, and then or the house settlement where there's going to be less scholarships. Do you notice that they have access to those types of recruits?
I do. The average rating of the Fresno State commitment has gone up a bit the last few years or so with this. They're getting a lot more of the mid to upper tier 3-star recruits. Even you look around California, where Stanford's recruiting a different kid. They're going national and academic. And now Cal is a program that, a lot of the resources that went into taking kids that Fresno State wanted are now going to the portal. They're a very portal heavy team. USC, obviously, UCLA. I think Fresno State's seeing fewer of the kids that they wanted in the past getting poached by those teams, but also you've got more programs from not the West Coast coming in and taking California talent as well. So a little bit of give or take, but I think in general, the high school level of talent has increased a bit, and this staff has done a pretty good job finding some of these guys that are, again, in the Midwest that aren't getting a whole lot of looks, that when our scouts watch the film, they usually end up being evaluated a lot higher than we expected.
Well, Jackson, what do you think the main strength of this team in 2025 is?
Yeah, it's funny because I'm very obviously the biggest question mark is the O-line, but they're trying to be a team that their biggest strength is running the ball, and they've got the running backs and tight ends. So if they do get things done in the trenches, they're going to run it and do it very effectively. And again, fingers crossed for their case, they do. I think this is a team that they just want to run the ball and play good defense, and that usually turns into W's for a lot of teams. And again, hopefully when it comes time to pass the ball, they've got enough guys to throw it and catch it that they need to.
Well, it's a new staff. What does success look like for the Bulldogs this season?
It's Fresno State, oftentimes in the Mountain West and even more so in the WAC, you could pretty much circle 4 wins or so in conference in most years. And non-conference, maybe you had one big money game, a couple of wins, you circle there. And there's just 2 or 3 games that kind of differed between a 7 or a 10 win season most years. And now there's so much parity in the Mountain West right now. And this non-conference schedule, Fresno State opens at Kansas, Georgia Southern at home might be their toughest home game, at Oregon State. They could be 3-0 or 0-3. I really am not sure how these first 3 games are going to go. And I don't think you can really look at any conference game and say it's an automatic win or a loss. So Southern from the FCS is about the only team really you can really guarantee as a win on this team, this schedule. So it could go a lot of different ways. I think at minimum, they've got to be a bowl eligible team. As much as the schedule can go either way, the favorable games are at home. So if they take care of business at home and get a couple wins on the road, all of a sudden you're looking at 7-8, pretty solid season. I think success for these coaches, they want to win the Mountain West. That's what they've been preaching. They think they can do it. And I think there's enough parity to make a claim. I think if they're in 3 or 4 range in the final conference standings, I think that's a pretty decent finish for all things considered. And, hopefully they get that 1 or 2 wins they need to kind of get over the hump and be in that championship game.
Well, we've kind of covered a lot. We've covered recruiting, the NIL stuff, offense, defense, special teams. Is there anything else that you want to share? Think that we should know about this 2025 team heading into the season?
Yeah, covered a lot. Just again, this is going to be a fun. It's again a lot of different ways the season can go. It's going to be a smash mouth team. It's going to be your Pat Hill, I think, esque type of team. It's going to be one that comes in with the chip on its shoulder, and we'll see if they have enough physicality when they open the year at Kansas. So it's only one of only 4 games, I think, in week 0. So if you want to watch college football, you're probably going to be watching the Bulldogs, and that's what the product that they're hoping to put on there is one that is going to be very physical and smash mouth and old school. And we'll see if it pans out or not against a pretty decent Jayhawk team.
All right, Jackson, thank you for taking time out of your day to spend with us and share your knowledge. We greatly appreciate it.
Well, thank you very much for having me. I appreciate it.
All right, if you're watching us on YouTube, please hit that like and subscribe button. And if you're listening to us in podcast form, please rate and review on Spotify or Apple Podcasts. Thank you all for your support. Until the next time, we are the G55.
Bulldogs,